20 years ago, I took one of my dad's books, and there was a chapter on Moses, and I still to this day have the very first sentence of that chapter memorized. It said, Hollywood would have had to invent Moses if God didn't write his story, because his life contains all of the elements of any great epic. Because that's Moses' life. It contains all of these extraordinary moments. Moses was an extraordinary person, and while Hollywood didn't invent his story, they certainly over the years have tried to express it, right? That's why Charlton Heston played him in a Cecil B. DeMille film once upon a time. That's why DreamWorks made Prince of Egypt, where I went for a 10th birthday party once upon a time. It's why there's all these songs written about his life. In fact, I'm gonna date myself a little bit, but if you're a church kid of the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, maybe you'll remember this as well. One of the very first songs I learned how to play on guitar was Pharaoh, Pharaoh. Anyone remember that song? Pharaoh, Pharaoh, ooh, babe. Anyone else? A couple. It was sung to the same tune as Louie Louie, but it was a solid camp song. I had someone last night said, yeah, our youth group, we called ourselves the Pyromaniacs, and we sang that song all the time because of Moses and the burning bush, and we were on fire for God. Moses' life. I think it is such a compelling life and such a meaningful life for us because there are moments in his story that we can all relate to. We can all relate to his life. In Moses' life, we see with him that he dreams big. And we like to dream big. Like Moses, we also long for purpose. And like Moses, we also sense that life is more than what we experience. But also like Moses, we know that we fail. We know that we're flawed. And we also know that, like Moses, we have fears. But just like we see in the life of Moses, even in our darkest moments, when life feels hopeless, we still have an optimism that things could be different. We dare to believe that the miraculous can still happen. And I think that's why we find Moses' life so compelling. In the dreaming big and in the deepest, darkest valleys, what we see God do in his life has so much to offer us. We're carrying on looking at the life of Moses, and today we're in Exodus chapter 3. If you grab the Bible in the seat back in front of you, it's page 41. Exodus 3, verse 1, it says this. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So at the beginning of chapter 3, we meet Moses again, and he's doing the same thing that he was doing in chapter 2. He is tending the flocks of his father-in-law in the desert. Pastor James talked a little bit about that last week, but Exodus 3 begins by making a tie to the previous section, saying what he was last doing, he's still doing it now. In Exodus 3, he's doing the same thing that he was doing last chapter. But what we might miss, if we just read through this really quickly, is that Exodus chapter 3 is 40 years later. 40 years later. Exodus 3 compresses decades of wandering into a single sentence. And if we rush through that reality, it feels like Moses ran away, was tending the flocks, and then God immediately intervened in his life. But what Exodus 3 shows in a sentence was an entire season of Moses' life. And when we pick up in Exodus chapter 3, Moses is 80 years old. When we read through the scriptures, it can often feel like chapter after chapter of action-packed moment and highlight reel and this incredible experience and then a burning bush and like right one after another, after another, after another. And if we read it that way, we can neglect to see that there are very long seasons of wandering between them. And I just want to highlight that there's 40 years of wandering here so that as a church family, we can normalize when we find ourselves in the desert season. When we find ourselves in difficult wandering places. When we find ourselves in the wasteland for way longer than we would ever like to be. I just want us to be able to find ourselves in this story. Because it's not always an immediate intervention. Sometimes we might be in the wilderness wanderings far longer than we would ever like. Moses was in the desert for decades. I was imagining this week, imagine having a conversation with Moses the day before the burning bush. Imagine having a conversation with him. Imagine what his mentality must have been like. Imagine what his attitude, his posture. Imagine what he must have been feeling the day before the burning bush encounter. He had been in the wilderness for 40 years, banished, running away, hiding, 40 years of desert wanderings. He's in a wasteland for decades. And imagine if you went up to him and said, "Hey, Moses, someday the Bible's going to be written. And you're going to be in it. In fact, Moses, there's going to be 4 books of the Bible dedicated to your life. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all the way up to chapter 34, about your life." Imagine what Moses must have thought that would be written about if you had talked to him. Like, Moses, what do you think it's going to be about? He's 79, 80 years old. He'd be like, well, it's probably about how not to live. Because I've been wandering here for decades, and I was born into unique circumstances. I'm sure there's going to be a bit of a highlight reel of the Nile River floating, because that's pretty cool. Probably about a royal upbringing. Probably about my dreams and how I wanted to try and save my people. But there's going to be a lot about how to waste a life, I bet. Because I squandered it all away with a choice and I murdered someone and I've been running ever since. Could you imagine then saying to him, "No, Moses, there's going to be 137 chapters of the Bible dedicated to your life. And right now, in this moment, we're only in chapter 2. Could you imagine what that must have been like for him to hear? What do you mean we're only in chapter 2? It's like, oh yeah, Moses, there's 135 chapters still to be written about your life. Still on the horizon. We're just getting started, brother. And I just want to highlight that for us right now, because I want to say to those of you here that feel like you've been in the desert, that feel like you've been wandering in the wilderness for way too long. Perhaps you feel like your childhood was rough. Perhaps you feel like you have made some terrible choices, or maybe some people have made some terrible choices that have hurt you in a devastating way. Maybe you feel like you've been wandering in the wilderness for decade after decade, but perhaps this might just be chapter 2 for you as well. Maybe God is just getting started with your life. One of the things we see at the very beginning of Moses' life is that the wasteland, the wilderness, is never wasted if we can learn to see what God is doing in our lives. And if we take a step of faith. Do you see God in your life today? Do you know what he's inviting you into? Do you know that he's calling your name today? Now, one of the things we see in Moses' life is God intervenes in his life and calls to him. And then immediately after calling to him, God gives him a purpose. And we will see this time and time and time and time and time again. Whenever God intervenes in someone's life and redeems them and saves them and restores them, immediately after that, he then calls them out. And when God calls us, he then calls us out too. God says to Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them. So now go. I'm sending you. Now again, put yourself in Moses' shoes. Imagine receiving that commission. God calls Moses to go back to Egypt, the place he has probably thought about every day for decades, the place of his deepest pain, the place of his biggest failure, with memories of murder replaying in his mind of what had taken place in Egypt. And now God calls him and says, I need you to go back to Egypt. Talk to the very people you have been hiding from. And I just bring us into the story and say, is there a place God's calling you to go? Perhaps a place that's uncomfortable. Perhaps a place you've been wanting to avoid. Perhaps a conversation you've been trying to skip over, and God's like, I need you to go talk to that person you've been running from. Like maybe God's not calling you around the world. Maybe he's just calling you to go across the hallway or across the street or across the aisle. Maybe to the person at school whose locker is beside yours, or maybe it's across the dressing room on whatever team you might be on. Just as God saw, heard, and was concerned about the suffering of his people in Egypt, so he sent Moses, God still sees, hears, and is concerned about the suffering of people in Calgary and around the world today, and so he calls his people to go to them. Do you know where God is calling you to go? Because his plan is still the same. When there's people in difficult places and spaces, he calls his people to go to them. I'd imagine some people here this morning know exactly where God is calling them to go. You know exactly to what person or what situation or what circumstance. You just know where God's asking you to go. But I imagine some people here probably don't. It's like, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. And if that's you, I would just first and foremost say, maybe why don't you just ask God? Would you bring to mind someone? A name, a place, a person, a space? God, would you just show me where you want me to go? Or maybe he would reveal it in our time together this morning. Because I think the story of Moses can help provide a lot of clues into some of the ways that God calls us to places. Some of the things we see in Moses' life where he was called to is first, It was a place of brokenness for him that God had restored in him. God often calls us to go to places that he's healed us from. Is there a place that he might be calling you? Another thing we see here is Moses knew that there were people suffering in Egypt. He knew that to be the case. And so God called him to go there. If there's a place where you know people are suffering and it sits heavy on your heart, maybe that's where he wants you to go. Often he wants us to go to a place that we're familiar with or we'll feel a passion for. One of the things we see throughout the entirety of the Bible is that often the best future ministry is shaped by our past history. You see, whether it be Abraham or Moses or Joseph or Paul or David or Jesus or Peter or any of the disciples, throughout the scriptures, people often get pulled and called out of their comfort zone to an encounter with Jesus. After being transformed by him, they go right back to where they were, transformed by the gospel to then go and serve and love people. Is God calling you to go somewhere? This burning bush encounter is an iconic moment of divine intervention. God speaks his name, there's holy ground, there's this commission. It's this powerful encounter. I like to imagine what that must have been like. I like to imagine if I was there, what it would be like to see it. You know, in my mind, God speaks to Moses and he basically says to Moses, like, baby, you're up. It's your time to go. I'm calling you. And I like to imagine if I were in that place, how would I respond? If God was like, Kyle, it's your turn, go. How about you? If you had a burning bush moment and God was like, I need you to go right now. I'm sending you. I think we would love, I know I would, and I think most of us would love to respond like, yes, Lord, let's go, I'm in. I'm in. But one of the beautiful parts of the Bible is how honest it is and how it just tells the truth about us as humanity. God calls and Moses hesitates and pushes back. Can we be honest to say just like us? I mean, maybe this morning already you've known where God's calling you and there's a hesitation. When God calls us, we hesitate, we push back. In this section of the scriptures, there's like 4 verses dedicated to God calling Moses, verse 7, 8, 9, 10. The entire rest of the chapter, and up until verse 17 in chapter 4, is dedicated to Moses hesitating and pushing back towards God. Like, how real is that? God's call is clear. What it really tries to show us is how much Moses tries to hesitate. And so here's my gentle, hopefully kind warning to every one of us this morning. If you know God has called you or invited you to do something, and you've been hesitating or you've been pushing back or you've been delaying obedience or scared to move forward, I believe through God's word this morning, he's going to strip all those excuses away. He's going to take them all away. Because God loves you enough to not let fear shape your life. And God loves the people who are hurting enough to not have you delay any longer. Because he's calling us to go. Verses 1 through 10 is God calling Moses. And here's Moses' very first pushback to him. Verse 11, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Anyone relate to that? God calls, he calls us to some task and we're just like, me? Who am I? Really? Me? Why me? You can't be serious. And I think that's super relatable for all of us. Because let's just be honest. We live in a city where every single day we see needs around us. every day. We know that there are needs around us. Like, the high school, the junior high you go to, it needs some light in there. You know that there are needs in that place, that students need a better hope for how to live. If you go to a workplace, you know that there are all kinds of areas that are lacking integrity. You know it needs some hope. It needs some light. Like, we all know our homes need healing. We all know when team culture is broken. We know that there are areas in our neighborhoods that are just fundamentally flawed. We know that the group chat needs a moral compass. Like, we know that there are all kinds of needs in the world around us. But when it comes to addressing that, we think, me? Really? It can't be me. No, not me. Like, I'm just a teenager. Who am I to change the entirety of my high school? I can't go to my principal. Are you joking? Nuh-uh. Not me. Or maybe it's like, I'm just a college student. I'm just trying to get my grades so that I can go in the workplace and then I can make a change. Or maybe it's like, well, I know I'm working, but I'm just trying to pay my dues so then I can get into a position of leadership, because then my word will change everything. I'm just trying to get to retirement. I'm not trying to face plant at the finish line and implode this thing. Maybe you just feel like Moses, like, I've been in the wilderness wasting away for decades. Who am I? I think we can relate with that. But what I find beautiful is God's response to him. Moses is like, who am I? And God says in verse 12, I'll be with you. Do you notice that God doesn't reassure Moses by praising his resume? He just shifts the focus. It's not about who you are, Moses. It's about who I am, and I will be with you. Which is to say, church, God is far more interested in your availability than your ability. Does God have your yes? You might say, who am I? And you might be right. But God's like, I'll be with you if you give me your yes. I'll be with you. And then God adds a sign. He says in verse 12, this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And I want to point two things out from this passage. The first one is this. Do you notice the sign? When you've brought the people out, you will worship here. Notice that that sign is only seen after Moses takes the step of obedience. Do you notice that? God's like, you will worship people here once you've done what I've asked you. That's how you'll know I've sent you. God promises a sign only after Moses takes the first step of courageous faith and obedience. Could it be for you that the sign you're seeking of the Lord's call on your life will only be seen after you take the leap of faith? Like, if it were me in that moment, I'd be like, God, I want the sign before I go. Like, maybe if you could just make the clouds a nice arrow straight to the courts of Pharaoh, then I'll know. I was like, no. You'll get the sign after you obey. Maybe the sign you're looking for is one step after your obedience. Take the step and see. The second reason I want to highlight that verse is this. God says this mountain where you find yourself right now, you will worship on one day. Which is to say, the very place of Moses' wilderness wanderings, the place where he felt like he was wasting away, would become the place of his worship. And only God can take our wastelands and turn them into holy ground. I don't know what your life might feel like right now. Perhaps you feel like you've been wandering in the wilderness for decades. And I just want to say to you that the Lord can take that place and turn it into the place of your most sincere worship. He can turn it into holy ground if you will trust him with your story. Moses then moves to a second pushback, and he says, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, well, what's his name? What shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am, and this is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And this name is one of the most significant disclosures in the scriptures. There's all kinds of literature. There's books and journals and articles all dedicated to just that one verse. But in a nutshell, what it means when God says who God is, he's like, I am self-existent. That is to say, I am God all by myself. And then he says, I am self-sufficient. I will be God whether you worship me or not. And it also means that I am faithful. I am faithful. God's response to Moses is basically saying, Moses, you know who I am. And the Israelites, they know who I am. I am, and I have sent you to go. And what this means for us is if God is who he says he is, then God will do what he says he will do. And if this one at the center of the universe, the self-existent, the self-sufficient, the faithful God is sending us to go, who are we to say no? And if we get real clear on who God is, that he will do what he says he'll do, that he is the one holding this all together, and that he is faithful to do it, it becomes really difficult for us to say, nah. After realizing that I am is the one sending Moses, he then says this, well, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, well, the Lord didn't appear to you? How interesting that Moses is more afraid in this moment of what the people would say than the actual task at hand. And how true is that for us too? I don't want to go and talk to that person. What if they make fun of me? What if they mock me? What if they're rude or unkind to me? We get so frequently more scared of the people than the actual task. And God responds to Moses with a couple of signs in this moment. The first one, he says, what's in your hand? And Moses is like, well, I've got this shepherding staff. And God's like, okay, take that staff and throw it on the ground. So Moses takes the staff, he throws it on the ground, and it turns into a snake. That would be terrifying. And I think it's like the most sensical Bible verse. Moses ran away. It's like, yeah, I would have done the exact same thing. That thing turns into a snake and runs away. I'm out. Like, see ya. And then God says, pick it up by the tail. That's even more scary than going to Pharaoh, but okay. So he picks it up by the tail and it turns back into a staff. And then God says, take your hand, the other hand, put in your cloak. So he puts it in his cloak. Pull it out and pulls it out, and it's leprous. It's white. The sign of death, the sign of being kicked out of the community. And God's like, put it back. And he puts it back, he pulls it out, and it's like normal. Snakes and skin diseases, by the way, two things that he's going to have a lot of experience with in his wandering later on in the story. But God just says, what's in your hands? On one hand, there's the shepherding staff. In the other hand, there was nothing. But God uses those things to be a sign of what he can do. He didn't say, go make something, go find something, go get something. He just says, what do you got in your hands? And then he says, go with what you got. And for us, church, we may feel like our hands are empty. Maybe on the one hand, you're like, all I got is a pencil. All I have in the one hand is a clipboard. All I have in the one hand is fill in the blank, whatever thing you might use at work or at play. And the other hand is actually just totally empty, and God's like, perfect, that's all you need. When God calls us to go, he just says, go with what you got. We don't have to manufacture up utensils or tools to go. He just says, go with what you got. You might feel like you have no special ingredients, but what you have is enough if God is in it. And if God's calling you to go, he is in it. And here's Moses' final pushback. It says, pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So he starts to talk about his own limitations, perhaps his own personal insecurities. But what's really interesting is it's not entirely true. If you jump ahead to Acts chapter 7, there's this moment where a man is being martyred for his faith, and he starts to talk about the story of God. And he has this section on Moses, and when he talks about Moses in Acts chapter 7, he says Moses was powerful in speech and in action. Isn't it interesting to note how fear warps and distorts our own self-perception? When we're scared, we tend to see ourselves through the wrong lens. Who am I? I can't do this. I'm not a good speaker. Send someone else. And God's response is beautiful. He says, who gave human beings their mouths? Who gave them who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. Moses is like, I'm slow of speech. I'm not good at talking. My mouth is broken. And God's like, who gave you that mouth you're talking bad about? Don't talk bad about what I gave you. I know what you have. I gave it to you. And now I'm saying, go and use it. And for us, if there's a part of our lives where we're like, I'm not fill in the blank enough, I think God's just saying, I know exactly what you have because I made you, and I'm asking you to go with that. Don't speak bad about what I gave you. What you got, I want you to use. I'll take care of it. And then he says, not only do I give humans their mouth, he then says, who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Which is to say, I also control the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the nose. And so he's like, you may feel like your speech is not up to par, but who made the ears that's going to hear it? Is it not I? You don't like what you got, you can take it up with the one who's sending you. You may feel like you don't have enough to give, but God also controls the one who's going to receive your ministry. Whatever we may feel like we're lacking, God's like, I know who you are and what you have. I'm still calling you to go. How dare we say the raw materials of our lives are not enough if the one who formed us in our mother's womb is now calling us to go and use what he gave us. This weekend's title is Overcoming Personal Insecurities, and I think it is absolutely beautiful how in this moment where Moses talks about his deepest insecurity, God never once promised to fix it. He's not like, I'll take it away from you, Moses, don't worry. No, you go with what you got. My presence will go with you, and that is enough. I think that's difficult for us, though, because just like Moses, we allow fear or insecurity to warp our perspective of ourselves. I'm not good enough at speaking. I'm not quick enough on my feet. I'm not smart enough. I'm not powerful enough. Like we know we're incapable to change a nation or a city or a neighborhood or a home or a relationship or our own hearts. But even so, God's like, go with what you got. Did I not give you what you have? Go. Will you go with what you have? Insecurities and all. Trusting that God's presence will go with you? Does God have your yes today? In this passage, Moses is called by God in two ways. The first is the burning bush moment. When Exodus 3 talks about this moment, it says God was ahead of Moses. That is to say, God knew where Moses was going, and God was waiting, and God was watching, and when Moses came close enough, God called him by name. Moses, Moses, you're in a holy place. And I can't help but believe that for some people in the room today or joining us online, that today is your burning bush moment. God has gone before you. He's been watching you. He's been waiting. He's been walking with you. He's loved you when you didn't even know it. And today, he knew where you were going to be, and he was ahead of you in a burning bush, and he's been waiting, and now that you've come near, he's calling your name and saying, hey, I see you. I've been waiting for you. You're in a holy place, and I love you, and I've got a plan for you. I know you feel like you've been wandering for a real long time, but today can be chapter 2. We can just be getting started today. And if you know that today's your burning bush moment, where you've been wandering, you feel like you've been wasting in the wasteland, dying in the desert, but today you're like, oh no, that's the Lord calling me by name. I wonder if you'd respond like Moses and just say, here I am. Oh friend, you will never regret it. In fact, if you hear him, or if you know today is your burning bush moment where the Lord has been before you, waiting for you, I wonder if you would take one scary step of faith, probably the first of many, and if you would just raise your hand as a way of saying, here I am. If today's your burning bush moment, would you just do that? Say, Lord, here I am. Here I am. Bless you. He sees 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 you. Chapter 2. He's got a beautiful plan. Right after Moses says, here I am, the Lord then gives him a call and a commission. And Moses' response is they're familiar. He says, who am I? Who are you? What about them? What about me? And do you notice that trajectory? The first pushback that Moses says is, well, I don't know if I'm enough. It's this own internal sense of identity and fear. Then the next thing he says, well, who are you, God? Who are you to call me to go? And then the third thing he says is, what about them? And then the fourth thing is, what about my own insecurities? And what he's getting at with all of these pushback is one of them is identity. One of them is unknown about who God is. One of them is an external reality about other people. And the fourth one is an internal reality about his own limitations. And in every single one of them, God says, you are enough because I've made you. Who am I? You are the one that I knit together and I'm calling you to go. And then to Moses' pushback of who God is, he's like, I am the one at the center of the universe. I am God all by myself. I am self-sufficient and I am faithful and I will do what I say I will do. And those external fears that you have, you don't have to worry about them. Go with what you got. God will take care of the details. You want to see what God can do? Go where he's going. And when it comes to his own personal insecurities, what about me? I'm not good at speaking. Church, hear this clearly. The Lord still sees. The Lord still hears. The Lord is still concerned about the suffering of his people, and he still sends. Just like Moses in the wilderness, the Lord still sends us to go. The one who knit you together sees you. The one who heard the Israelites crying out in Egypt has heard your cry out too. He's walked with you through your childhood. He's been there through the most painful mistakes. He's walked with you through your fears and your failures while you ran away and wandered in the wilderness. And today, he is still with you, and he's been waiting for you, and he's been calling out to you saying, it's only chapter 2. Let's get going. Let's get going. Church, this is not your end. Perhaps it has been only the preparation that you needed to see God in a new way, to go to people that are currently in pain. Your wasteland is never wasted. The one who sees you and calls you is faithful, and he will do it. And he says, I am with you. Today, does he have your yes? Church, will you give God your yes today? Imagine what it would look like if our whole church said together, here I am, I will go. Imagine those who are in pain being met with the loving touch of Jesus, the broken being healed, the hurting being lifted, the lost finding a home, the kingdom of God invading Calgary so that it looks a whole lot more like heaven. Church, does God have your yes today? May it be so.